Brothers, welcome to the Finished Man podcast, where we discuss the journey of manhood, not only the formation of boys to men, but we also want to talk about what it takes for young men to grow into fuller manliness. And our aim here is to get to the heart of core issues, and we want to talk to you about concrete steps and solutions. My name is Dr. Phil Chavez, and I'm joined now with Chuck Harvey. This is our second session, which I'm looking forward to. I think we had a good first one, and I think there's some exciting things ahead with some exciting content. But before we begin, let's start with a prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, again, we put ourselves in your presence, ask for your light and your peace and your grace. Father, give us that insight we need to move forward with these points we want to present right now. Father, just direct all that goes on here and order it as will be pleasing to you. And may we always move in the mission and the identity of your Son. And we ask all these things in his name. Amen. All right, Chuck, where do you think we should pick up from here?
Well, Philip, I was thinking maybe in the category of laying groundwork, we might have people who are watching this podcast who aren't familiar with your work, and just to kind of give them some background. What is your background, or what is your expertise in this area? Either academic expertise or also just experience that you feel gives you a unique voice in addressing this issue.
Well, my concern, spending years in ministry and whatnot, it was somewhat a mystery to me too, why Catholic Church had the means of grace and the truth. Why are Catholics so troubled in their formation, trouble in their human identity, trouble in their journey? Why is the divorce rate the same? And so it helped me to see the importance that there's a complete integral formation needed for the human person. I don't think it's being spelled out today. And so I actually have my doctorate in character formation. In other words, a doctorate in moral theology from Rome, but with an auspice of papal teaching on character formation from Pius XI, where that formation started being spoken about through John Paul II. And so, yeah, I have 500 pages done on that. And that was life transforming, which gave me a lot of the principles I speak about gave me a lot of the guideline in terms of principles for which is based upon what I talk about today. I often don't talk about those principles because they're so basic, but everything that I say is based upon in some way what I've learned from those principles. But also too, when I was studying in the East Coast, I did get a degree in marriage and family studies, got a graduate degree in that. Also, I studied philosophical anthropology, trying to understand the nature of the human person from a philosophical perspective. And I did my thesis on the conflict of emotion and neurosis and the nature of that. So what happens, fear, anger, joy, happiness, things when things conflict and all the rest, and the kind of dissettled nature. So that helped me again see the importance of seeing even the emotional nature of the human person, which oftentimes I find as Catholics and Christians, sometimes we don't pay the proper attention to. Sometimes we do, but to pay attention to the proper way. But to understand our emotional nature is important too, because there's emotion which is expressed on the spiritual and the natural level that we need to understand as well. So academically, that's somewhat of my background. But I've mentored many men in the past. Years of men's ministry since 2006, speaking research on these topics. I've had a recent grace too of working with a fraternity of Catholic men from one of the, let's just say, I won't reveal who they are, from one of the Cal State system schools, and that's been transforming and just a lot of fun. Most of my time in men's ministry was really to speak to middle-aged guys, and I enjoyed that. But I really enjoyed speaking to college-age youth. I haven't got much experience speaking to high school youth, but the times I've had, I've really enjoyed it. And even one of the things that surprised me is how it's possible to even waken young men up to even more difficult concepts like patriarchy and being a leadership in the home, the aspiration for fatherhood. These are all inside the human male, which I believe simply need to be woken up and taught. And so at least those are the basics of some of the things I've been engaged with. And of course, countless conversations with men. And trying to dig deep. But I think too, I can't help but think too that I try to spend a lot of time in prayer every day. So I ask for insight into what I'm doing. And I take a lot of what I learned in prayer. And of course, many of the things I learn about the formation of the human person come really from the scriptures, in the sense of meditating, especially on the life of Christ, and seeing some kind of principle that I've deduced from that. Maybe someday in the future we'll be able to go into some of those, dig more deeply into some of those episodes of Christ and the formational lessons we can gain from that, because they're countless. And so it's always a lot of fun digging into that.
I guess going from the head to the heart, why is the proper formation of men and the whole idea of helping men become the finished man? Why is that personally important to you?
Was that passage in, was it Proverbs, my people perish without knowledge, and so, to become the finished man isn't just something that happens by accident. Now, in some way, maybe it did in the past when families were intact, there was a moral order, the schooling was ordered. And of course, the schooling system today, it's very much a contemporary phenomenon, the way people are educated today. But there were many, and men worked before they got married, they had homes, they got married at an earlier age. And so a lot of things were very much ordered. And so I won't say formation was entirely turnkey, but a lot of it was. I mean, boys were raised to be men in forums by which they had, like I said in the last program, fixed things, they engaged in things, they had to work, they had to take many responsibilities very seriously. And so they matured faster. They understood the value of being married and having a lot of children, and being very generous and open about that. And so today, what happens when we've lost a lot of those older, or let's just say earlier values and practices, now we've got to be a little more intentional and concerted. And so in a lot of formation, it's important that we just spell these things out. And I think there's a mentality in the church that, and I've heard men's leaders say this, well, don't you think all we really need to do is form men in Christ? And once we form them in Christ, they'll become exactly the man they're supposed to be. Well, it sounds really good. And yeah, maybe totally, if you can't really form them in Christ, but Christ had a human character too that he manifested that must be taught as well. But those lessons for Christ aren't just a matter of, what does this mean to gain his grace and to, gain the merit of what he earned for us, and participate in the sacraments he instituted, and maybe, pray like he did. But no, if we look more closely at his life, we'll find a lot of those lessons, what it is to raise a man. So yeah, in today's day and age, we have to be more purposeful. And I think, more needs to be written too, that's more accessible to parents in terms of child formation, that spells out more concerted what a child's to become, both male and female.
Right. So, but have you experienced the effects, personally or in your family, about when this doesn't happen? Like, when men aren't formed, or when the church or the schools don't deliver proper formation?
Yeah, I think so. Even my own schooling experiences, I was educated by the Servite Fathers in Anaheim, California in high school, and it was brutal. A lot of Vietnam War vets were teaching. So, they understood what discipline was. And, you never had when I was in high school, and I don't mean to be disparaging about Servite Fathers or my experience necessarily, but there was no real devotional practice, or nothing was encouraged. I didn't even know what a Servite priest really was other than their name. And I knew they were a congregation. I learned probably 2 decades after I graduated, that's one of the original 7 orders of the church. So a religious formation was somewhat absent. Now, my father too, my mother was sort of, you could say, the spiritual leader in the home. My father wasn't as much, but my father was a contractor. And so one of the things my brothers and I did, two things which I maybe set myself aside from many men, is one is that I worked in an earlier age. And so I understood the value of work when I was a teen, fixed many of the things myself. But because of the nature of working with my dad, I spent a lot of time with my father. So one of the things I don't relate with other men is that distant father was never part of his life. Now, it did happen too, as my dad started, I'm the second of 10. So as he started having more kids, maybe I did get left a little more behind and was on my own quite a bit. But I find that experience, just working with my dad, I just learned a lot. And so whether he may not have had the greatest wisdom, we did have a lot of conversations about things. And so even then I saw the importance of what it is for a father to impart knowledge and experience and stories and just shoot the breeze with his son, which is important too. So I learned that. But one of the things which happened too, which alerted me to the importance of what we're doing right now, is simply this, is that my younger brother, now poor guy, when I was growing up, there was 4 of us boys and 6 girls, and 3 of the boys came, and my younger brother Michael got lost between the 7th girl and the 9th girl. Okay, so poor guy, he was raised up with a lot of estrogen around him. Now, through my pushing, I encouraged my parents to send him, instead of the local public high school, to a Catholic all-boys boarding high school, and a good, conscientious priest, generally speaking, especially the younger ones. But he lost the faith there, because these priests, with all good intentions in their sacrifices, had, I would say, no vision of what it is to form a boy to be a man. And it really struck me how important, if you're in a high school endeavor, all the more so in a high school endeavor, educational endeavor, that's a boarding school. I mean, you've got to have a very concerted program, very concerted understanding, clear understanding what it is to form a boy to be a man, because you're responsible from pretty much those ages of 13, 14 to 17, 18. So it's so important. And I find that gravely lacking today in Catholic education. Now, even non-boarding schools, it needs to have an integrate into it in the high school system. In that adolescent period, the word adolescens means becoming an adult. It's an encoded Latin word. And so there's got to be a very concerted formation into what it is to form one to be an adult, even if it is just a day school. And so even in my dissertation, and one of the things I probably learned from Pius XII the most, repeated the most, and Pius XI, I heard these quotations, is the number one end of all education is formation of character. It's not formation of knowledge so we can get degrees to get into good schools so we can get good jobs someday. No, it's the formation of the human person, which is the number one end in all instruction, in all formal education. So that really struck me. So the need to make formation very clear is a passion of mine. It's for which I have much personal experience with. And the sad thing is too, today, my brother and I, Mike, I love him deeply, and there's something we get along, but there's somewhat of a rift still between us. And of course, he hasn't practiced the faith virtually since he left high school. So there's a lot of problems there, a lot of struggle, because I believe if there was a good vision of formation of the male on the part of my parents, my father, and the high school he went to. Of course, he only lasted that boarding school 1 year. He had to leave, and it was good, because I think there were some things I know there were some things that are actually abusive in that system. So, but it marked him so deeply that he left the faith as a result of that, and he's never come back.
So do you think part of the issue that the priests there, you said they were probably well intended, that they to some degree not understand their role as being fathers, which I've observed.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and okay, and even founded on that, a lot of the priests when we were growing up, they went to minor seminaries, or rather, they went to seminary high schools.
Right.
And a lot of those men had very bad experiences. And I don't know of one that had any real vision. It's definitely, if you read some of their older manuals, you could tell they had no real vision of what it was to form a boy to be a man, which is also incumbent on a seminary formator, that no matter even what age a man is before ordained, he's got to see that his manhood's intact, and they must see to it that character formation is either established or rectified. Now, there's very few minor or high school seminaries today, but but they must see that that formation is rectified. There's no real vision for that. I've never seen one in any seminary proposal. I'd certainly like to, but I've never seen any kind of robust vision of forming the man and the priest when they're in formation. So I find that a very serious thing too. But to go back, you know, fatherhood again has its crowning, I think, in leading, protecting, and providing other men and women, other younger men and women, and sons and daughters. And so to do that, a fatherly, a paternal, a patriarchal kind of disposition has to be woken up in every man. Mm-hmm. And so even a priest, it's important that he receive the fullness of what is to be formed as a future husband and father, and seeing as his own priesthood in some way as a perfection of that formation, because he must embrace the church like a bride, and he must embrace, you know, his congregation as a father. That's why we do call him father. And so, yeah, and so if there's anyone who should have that vision very clearly, is the priest. And I don't think they really do. I've never really.
Yeah. I think sometimes not only the priest, but all of us look at the priesthood as an alternative to being a husband and a father, as opposed to a different form of being a husband and a father.
That's right. That's right. Well said. Because being a husband and a father needs to be formed in every man, and that always needs to be perfected, an ongoing journey of perfection and growth, no matter what a man's state is. So in my own single state, I'm very aware of, well, it's easy to talk about my being a father, but there's something about being a husband too, where even as a single person, I'm called to make a sacrifice for the church for the sake of the faithful. It's not only what I do in my work, but it's also who I am as a Christian man. So it's a part where I embrace the church and I offer myself up for whatever needful sacrifice needs to be made for the good of the church and the good of the faithful. But at the same time, too, I'm very conscientious of what it is to be a father. And I'm a father to many men, and even for that matter, women too. I mentor many. And what wakes me up to that is not just to set them straight or to make sure that they're on the path of salvation someday, or because I know more than they do, and boy, what a gift I can give them. No, what wakes me up to all of this is an instinctive fatherly dimension that I have, that I know is already in my nature. It's already in the nature of all of men, to want to be father-like to other younger men and women. Of course, you know, like begets like. And so it's good when men do it more concertedly with men, and women form other females, girls, to be more concertedly women. And so it's good when the sex properly forms each other and spends more time concertedly with their own sex and formation.
Right. You know, when you were talking about the whole idea of formation and you know, forming, like say for example, priests into being men, you know, what I've become aware of is even on our best days, say where I in the school I'm at, we talk about maybe forming children into adults, but children need to be more than just adults, right? In other words, the girls need to become women and the boys need to become men. And that's a very specific type of formation, as opposed to they're just sort of become these virtuous, androgynous adults.
Yeah, where all those duties become very, how would I say, very vague. I mean, in some way you could say they're good, at least in general, you know, so you hear the word responsibility a lot, hard work, committed, all these general things, which I think are all right. We attribute that to being an adult. But those have to be drilled down and incarnated in what it is to be men and women, husbands, wives, fathers, and mothers, right? So what it is to be committed, what it is to be responsible, what it is to be, you know, exercise diligence in these. We need to do that as men husbands and fathers, and learn how to do that, and what that means, and there are different roles in that.
Right.
And so, yeah, that needs to be defined and needs to be made very clear for men and women both. Absolutely.
Now, in our first episode, we talked about sort of the definition of what we mean, or what you mean by a finished man, and we may want to recap that a little bit. But I wanted to see if we could maybe go down a level and like
Okay.
break it down. Like, what are the components of a finished man?
Okay, as I mentioned, there are those. Okay, so what hold for a finished man or woman is to be formed in 7 key elements: spiritually, morally, physically, emotionally, socially, domestically, and I keep forgetting that 6th. Okay, so there's 7 there, and so there needs to be a vision of formation in each one. Now, there's a dichotomy certainly on the spiritual and the human. Okay, and that has to be clear. Human formation on one level, especially if somebody is growing, is more complicated than spiritual formation. Once one is grown, I think spiritual formation in some way becomes more paramount. But there's a lot of steps in human character development. Even physically, if a man isn't formed well physically, he will degenerate in terms of his mental and his spiritual state. Even his lower testosterone, there's something about a man too. He needs to be physically fit too, and needs to be healthy in order to exercise himself well spiritually and temporally. I find that very important. And then this isn't to go off into a tangent, but one of the things that motivates me to do what we're doing now is because on the physiological level, I think what is very grave from my observations, and I live in California, but I visited the East Coast and spent a lot of time there. From my observations, young men today are actually physically degenerating. They're not as physically robust. The chest, the arms, the legs, the torso, the jaw, they're not as robust as their parents. And what really hurts me to say this, but I have to say this to make my point, is that in young men, especially let's just say in their earlier 20s, from what I can tell and what I've observed, and I'm not far off when I say this, the majority of young men have narrower shoulders than their mothers. Not just their fathers, but their mothers. And so, which means that they're physically degenerate. And I can tell you for all of them, I read one study over a 50-year period generally from like 1970 to 2018, I think it was, something like that, where the overall testosterone for males is decreased about 30%. And so we're literally degenerating. And because of there's many causes to this, maybe we could do that another time, but we're physically degenerating. And so we got to wake up to that and say, hey, what is it now? We won't do that right now, but what does that mean to build us up now again physically? And so part of that certainly is being nutrition, stay away from toxic things, and to actually engage in weightlifting. I've gotten engaged in weightlifting. I did so pre-COVID, and I hadn't really done so since 19. I've always exercised, but I find the weights very solitary on a number of levels. So it's so important. So we can get into that, but I just see that it's just so important to really spell out these elements of training. And we go many things: spiritual, the intellectual, the moral, the sociological, the domestic. Even for some man, he has a political area of development too. We won't go into that. The physical area as well. And so I just find he must be educating all of these three. Now, when I boil these down, though, when I talk about a finished man, the paradigm I've developed are what I call the 18 pillars of manliness, which are under a man's mission, his identity, and his journey. Because as I see this, the way I divide this, mission, what a man does, his identity, who is he, and his journey, how does he live his life? It's very simple in the sense that I think those are the easiest categories I can understand men and wrap them up. In fact, I can find any discussion I have on manliness, I can fit under one of those categories. but they're in some way based on his three key questions. What do I do? Who am I? And where am I going? Mission, identity, and journey. His mission to be a leader, protector, provider, priest, prophet, and king. His identity, which has somewhat of a stage, moved from a beloved son to a loyal brother to a vital man, then a devoted husband, strong father, and veteran sage. That's what I call it. And in his youth and his journey into adulthood, he goes from, I think, three key phases or three key elements. Journey is far more complex, and it's hard to nail these down. But six key areas are what is for exploration, then initiation into new things, and then testing. And I say in his adulthood, he needs to be formed well in resolution, combat, and glory. It ultimately works for the glory of God, but he's got to be resolved in all the things that he's learned, and he's got to learn combat, what is to persevere and be strong and remain determined. So when I think of a finished man, I think of those, what I call those 18 pillars of manhood. And that's pretty much how I describe it. You could find those in other recordings on the Men's Academy and whatnot. But I find it gives a robust vision. Like I say, it works really well in the sense that any element I speak about in masculinity or manhood, I could fit into one of those categories.
So would it work in a sense for for someone who's listening or watching right now? It's almost like if you look at where you are in your life, where you are in terms of age, or where you are in terms of vocation, and sort of just generally look at those different elements as benchmarks, like kind of where I'm 25 years old. Where am I on that journey? Is that a way to assess kind of where are you to be able to figure out?
How am I figuring out those roles? That's a good question, because I do believe that. In fact, I wrote something that has been published. I've been sitting on it, like I sit on some other things, but I really believe that even at the outset of adolescence, at an adolescent level, he should learn those 18 pillars, and such that they're introduced to them. They may be unintelligible to them, and they may sound idealistic, and that's fine. But at least he understands them, and he understands that, hey, your father needs to form these in you. So when the time you're 18 and 19, and hopefully the latest 20, when he looks in your eyes and says, son, you're a full man now, that means he's in some way passed the test, or he's become in some way all those 18 pillars, especially like in a foundational way, a leader, protector, and provider, that he's learned those things and he's embraced those things, and he's been taught how to live them out in some way or shape or form. So that understanding, in fact, you raise a good question, because that should perfect itself. Definitely like after a man finishes college, if he doesn't go. I nowadays recommend they don't, just go into the trades. But by the time he's 30, he's reached a certain perfection of manliness. When he's become engaged, he needs to ask those questions again. When he's engaged in physical fatherhood, he needs to again revisit that. And when he's older, he must even see a deeper calling into forming men into those things. Now, I think the whole aspect of forming men should be in us even as boys. Older boys form younger boys, just the way that it is. I mean, when I was a kid, I raised in some way, you could say I was over my younger brothers. I had to lead them in things. I had to form them. And so yeah, that formational aspect and the perfection of growing these 18 pillars is lifelong. I mean, we can talk about certain landmarks for them, but in some way they should be part of our navigation and part of what we train and develop in other men.
Right, but I suppose you could get a sense for whether you are lagging. I know it's not exactly the same for every man, but extreme exaggeration, right? If I'm 40 years old and still living in my parents' basement, right, the proverbial,
yeah,
that's an indication that I'm not on the way to being a sage, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that now some men I think are going to be stuck there, but no matter where a man is in life, he needs to the best that he can, understand these pillars, embrace these pillars as his natural aptitudes and callings, and live them out the best he can, even if he is in a basement. Now, if he is in a basement and he's not providing for a family, yeah, it's otherwise very hard for him to grow in those things. One might say impossible. I don't know, but But I do know that he's called nonetheless as a man to execute those things. And so there's things that he could do if he's single to engage, with other young men in the community and or fight for the common good. And some things he could do in the society, school boards and abortion clinic, or even attend civic meetings and find out what's going on in his community. And of course, that requires a training in what the common good and that his duty is to uphold it, which that political dimension of us men is so important, because as I first learned from Leo the 13th, Pius the 10th, and Benedict the 15th, that theme of political responsibility, all those three popes made very clear that belongs more properly to a man than it does to a woman. And so all men also need political training, what it is to engage in the social order and to understand the common good and what the elements of the common good there are that they're responsible for maintaining. So, I hope you answered the question.
Yeah, when you mentioned the political order, it kind of reminded me of what we talked about in the first episode. That you had mentioned, or you acknowledged, we do live in a unique time, but which we do. What are some of the things, like I think of the political order, which seems almost in total chaos? What are some of the things that are just unique to our contemporary situation that make it, at least acknowledged, it's especially challenging for young men to do this, to become finished men?
Yeah. This is my opinion, but also I think it's the opinion of the Blessed Mother, and that is Russia has spread her errors. And those errors, while many of them are political and many of them are social and many of them are economic, they're also errors of the family. And so what happened, of course, what you have to do in order to socialize things and make the government number one and to force the economy to be dependent on government is you have to break down the family. So, of course, the communists knew in order to break down the family, you had to break down religion. And so that was one of their objectives. Now, we won't go into that element right now, but they purposely had to break down the family. And the way they broke that down, try to break it down, is they believed in the universal education formation of all women. And they believed that all women should be in the workforce. Okay, and that was something new at the time. Okay, when Marx and Engels, I think that probably was introduced even at the time of the French Revolution, but we won't go back into that. But its main propagating force was through a Marxist, Leninist, communist, socialist kind of vision that we have. And so men became absolutely, well, maybe not absolutely, they wouldn't say, but today we would say they're absolutely equal to men and women. Men and women are absolutely equal, right? And so there's no differences between the two. The roles are the same, their aptitudes are the same, everything's the same.
Equal meaning sameness, not equal in dignity, but you mean the idea that there's no distinction between men and women.
There's no distinction. And if there is, it's just something minor or insignificant. In fact, it's so minor and insignificant, you can actually switch them around. And of course, we got a lot of twisted thinking to think, well, we can actually switch around a character by just willing it. And so that's really twisted thinking. And so poor youth today, they grow up in a culture saying that, well, you're a man and a woman depending on what you believe you are. And so the youth grow, thinks, well, yeah, but this person here looks like a man. This person looks like a woman. And okay, now I'm now to believe that, well, this person who looks like a man could will to be a woman if that's what they wish to be. And this person who looks like a woman can actually wish to be a man. And we're supposed to treat them as such, despite them looking and appearing and acting opposite. So there's a world of illusion, I think, the youth are being raised in. And so where they're taught how to deny their sensible experience, and they're taught how to deny what is the obvious. And so we have that extra confusing factor here. But again, to sum it up, I think the over egalitarian aspect of men and women is seriously damaged to where we don't, So does even speak of like a man being a head of the home. Well, that's unintelligible because both parties are equal. And you even see this in a lot of Catholic marriage prep. Well, we're both equal. We just share, and you have your gifts, I have my gifts, and we just work together, and the end result will be a great thing as long as we're just working together, we're collaborating. And no, there's real hierarchy. There's a head of the home, and we could say there's a heart or whatnot. But yeah, it's this hyper-egalitarianism, which I think has disaffected youth very much, and has made it so it's very difficult to see different sex roles. In fact, so much so too that we now deny that men are stronger than women, and they are. Generally speaking, they are stronger than women, and so we're finding even that being denied. So the poor youth today, they're being brought up in a world of illusion. And a world of illusion too, where they're taught too that, well, at the end of the day, the government's here to provide for you. In fact, many have bought into the fact, well, now it's really the government's responsibility to provide for you. It's not necessarily your father's or yourself. And so we see a lot of entitlement as well. It's interesting. There's a quote, and I wish I knew where to find it. I remember when I was studying my doctoral dissertation. It was kind of shocking. It was by Pius XII, and he said, if we're to speak of the equality of men and women, they're only equal in one aspect, and that is they both have an eternal destiny. He said, in every other respect, they are unequal. So really, the conversation needs to be more about how men and women are unequal, not how they're equal, because that's a 2-minute answer. How they're unequal can take us days to talk about.
Right. And I find that I think with I don't know if you've studied this specifically, but it seems like, unfortunately, and not to indict all men or young boys, is that it's almost, I see the boys sometimes, because they almost hide behind this egalitarian. In other words, they hide behind it as a reason not to be responsible.
I think that's right.
I can just go and I'll just go play video games because because being a leader, protector, and provider, being Christ to the women in their lives, that takes work, right? And they all get back to, well, it's not fair, it's not even, so I'll just withdraw, and it's sad to see.
Well, isn't one part of this too, Chuck, is that men generally need to be summoned, and I won't say empowered because they already have the power, but they need to be told, well, you're a leader, lead. In other words, if men start waking up to their special calling, and they, shoulders go back, yeah, that's right, I am a leader. Okay, show me how to do that so I can lead. But the point is that unless you show a man a special aptitude, especially today, not in the past, I'm not talking about the past, but today, unless you show him a special aptitude, he's not going to receive them. Like, for example, I think it's very important. One of the reasons we're losing the abortion battle is because, properly speaking, the protection of life belongs to a man. Now, does that mean women don't have that role? Well, they do, insofar as it's secondary to a man's, but it's more proper to him to protect life and society. Therefore, it's more properly his obligation. Women are called to participate to the extent they can, and they do most of it, right? So pro-life work on one level is proportionally, it becomes like 75% theirs because they can participate at that higher level, because in some or many are free to do so, okay? And of course, in some way too, they're better when it comes to working with women directly in their direct needs, right? But the protection of life properly belongs to a male, properly belongs to a knight, okay? So men, if they're woken up to understand that, my role is to protect life, that's my role, and it's more so than a woman's, I need to be out there. And so when you show a man, I think, what's more properly his, then I think he's more apt to rise up and meet that role and fulfill it.
Right. Have you thought about why is it that we need that extra calling. You were saying in the last episode how women have a certain I forget the word, like a natural diligence, right? You were saying like once they get involved in something, they're going to follow through all the way, and sometimes it ends up being a disproportionate or a disordered amount of responsibility they take on.
Yeah.
Because they're diligent in pursuing it, and we men seem to jump on the opportunity to withdraw. I've always been curious, why is that?
It's this paradox about men and women where women, there's something about them. Now, of course, I want to talk about under balanced formation, but women have certain tenacity for their roles in a way men don't. And I mean, and especially in the natural order, when they have children, now this is changing, they would understand their obligations toward motherhood. In other words, to be a mother is more direct in raising children to be a father because they're more intimately connected. So they could see more things intimately connected with the raising of a child than a father can. A father, even though he may have a certain office, a lot of time he's got to be educated to that. And he's got to be trained and he's got to be summoned. And so in some way, on a certain order of things, while the man may be leader, a leader, protector, and provider, he needs to be summoned to those things because there's a part of man, I think, that's very fragile. In other words, he can be discouraged very easily and he will fail to rise up to something, especially if he's immature. He'll fail to rise up to his duty if he's discouraged about that, or he's despairing about that, or he doesn't think it's possible. So he'll give up when he's not called to give up. He's called to persevere. He's called to give it his best, whether he fails or not, or succeeds. He's called to give it his best, and like all of us are. But men can tend to weaken when they're not summoned or not woken up to a duty that they have. And so I think in today's day and age, men need to be woken up. And so when it comes to the pro-life movement, I would say women have intuitively are more woken up to necessity to getting involved than men are, even though men have more. At the end of the day, they're responsible. It doesn't mean they'll be doing most of the work because they have a responsibility. It just means it's incumbent upon them to see it's accomplished. Men are responsible for education in the home, as the popes and canon law would teach. But the mother of the home will be doing, practically speaking, 70% of it, directly and indirectly. So, but men are still responsible.
So what are the ramifications of that tendency for formation? In other words, even going back to when they're little boys, knowing that that's kind of how men are wired, how do we need to approach formation from the very get-go to tap into that reality?
Okay, and that goes back to an earlier question. So this is why we have to form men for their assertive drive, especially when they're young. Form the boys to be a little more daring. It's one of the reasons we have to take them out in nature, because in nature, a boy will come alive. He'll start chasing things and growing things. I know of a woman who owns some property out in the desert near me, and her boys are completely disconnected when they're at home, living closer to LA. They're on their devices and all the rest. But when she takes them out to her country property, they come alive and they forget they even have these gadgets, and they're outdoors all the time. So the outdoors becomes a forum to get them out there, to get more assertive. And she says they're more active. They don't need to be entertained. They find things to do. They're better engaged. And so we need to lead boys into things by which they're woken up, because to keep a boy inside in front of a game is for him to kind of die. I mean, there's something that him that dies. He may gain one little skill about how to be apt at controlling these certain buttons, but in all other respects, he's degenerating. And so boys, I think, are losing that natural assertion if we don't take him out there. And this is what sports teaches him. He needs to be taught how to take a hit. Even I remember in boxing, and you kind of learn that, hey, there's times where you're engaged and you're sparring, you're even doing a drill, and that punch is coming. Well, it's going to land. You could tell, just for the instant it's a man's ready to throw it. It's going to land. It's going to hit. It's going to make contact. And it's going to hurt. But you can't fear it coming. And so, as we say, we use that expression as men, you can't take a hit. Well, literally, that's really what it means. I mean, if you can't take a hit in a boxing ring, it's going to be otherwise hard to take a hit in life. This is why one of a plethora of reasons why boxing is so important for a boy, in my opinion, is because there he learns how to take a hit and not to fear it coming. I think priests and fathers and others, they're too afraid of getting hit.
Right.
And unless they're trained not to fear that, they're not going to be able to overcome it. But with that, that's always one of my favorite points. So let's close here. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it
was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be,
world without end. Amen.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chuck. See you next time.
Thank you, Philip.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Men's Academy YouTube channel. You can also find us at themensacademy.org and donate there if you feel so moved. God bless.